The old haveli stood silhouetted against the bruised twilight sky, a skeletal finger pointing towards the encroaching darkness. Locals whispered its name, Pret Bhavan, the House of Spirits. For generations, tales of unspeakable horrors had clung to its crumbling walls, stories of shadows that moved on their own, of chilling whispers carried on the wind, and of a malevolent presence that never truly left. A group of 5 urban explorers, adrenaline junkies fueled by internet fame and a thirst for the macabre, decided to ignore the warnings. There was Rohan, the charismatic leader and vlogger, Priya, the skeptical photographer, Samir, the tech expert armed with gadgets, Nisha, the quiet observer, and Arjun, the burly security enthusiast. They called themselves the Shadow Chasers, and their videos documenting paranormal investigations garnered millions of views. Pret Bhavan was their Everest. Their car bumped along the overgrown path leading to the haveli's rusted gates. A gust of wind slammed the gates shut with a deafening clang, making Nisha jump. Priya, ever the pragmatist, scoffed, "Dramatic much, nature?" But even her voice held a tremor. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of decay and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet like old blood. Cobwebs draped across antique furniture like ghostly shrouds. Dust motes danced in the weak beams of their flashlights, creating an illusion of fleeting figures. "All right, team, cameras rolling," Rohan announced, his voice echoing eerily in the vast hall. Samir set up his EMF reader and thermal cameras, while Priya started snapping pictures, her flash momentarily illuminating grotesque carvings on the walls. The initial hours were uneventful, filled with the usual creaks and groans of an old, abandoned building. Priya's skepticism grew. "See? Just an old house. All those stories are just that, stories." But then, the temperature in the main hall plummeted inexplicably. Samir's EMF reader spiked erratically. A low, guttural whisper seemed to slither from the shadows, too faint to understand, but undeniably present. Even Arjun, the most stoic of the group, shifted uneasily. As they ventured deeper into the haveli, the atmosphere grew heavier, more oppressive. In a dusty bedroom, they found a child's rocking horse, its paint chipped and faded. As Priya photographed it, the horse began to rock gently on its own. A collective gasp filled the room. "Okay, that's unsettling," Rohan admitted, his usual bravado slightly shaken. Nisha, who had been unusually quiet, pointed to a series of scratch marks on the wall beside the rocking horse. They looked fresh. Someone or something has been here recently. Their exploration led them to the basement, a dark and damp space that felt colder than the rest of the house. The air hung heavy with the metallic scent, now stronger and more cloying. In the center of the room, they found a rusted iron cage, just large enough to hold a person. A shiver of dread ran down their spines. Suddenly, the lights flickered and died, plunging them into absolute darkness. Panic flared. Flashlights danced erratically, cutting through the blackness. A blood-curdling scream echoed from somewhere above them. "Nisha!" Arjun yelled, his voice laced with fear. They scrambled back upstairs, their hearts pounding in their chests. They found Nisha huddled in a corner of the living room, her face pale and her eyes wide with terror. "It had touched me," she stammered, pointing to a red mark on her arm that looked like a burn. From that moment on, the haveli seemed to come alive. Doors slammed shut on their own. Disembodied footsteps echoed in the empty corridors, and chilling whispers brushed against their ears. Shadows stretched and contorted into grotesque shapes. Priya's camera malfunctioned, its lens cracking inexplicably. Samir's gadgets went haywire, spitting out static and gibberish. They tried to leave, but every exit seemed blocked. The gates they had entered through were now sealed shut, the heavy iron bars seemingly fused together. Windows refused to open. They were trapped. As the night wore on, the paranormal activity intensified. They saw fleeting glimpses of a gaunt, shadowy figure lurking in the periphery. They heard a woman's mournful weeping coming from the upper floors. Arjun swore he felt icy fingers brush his neck. Rohan, despite his fear, kept the camera rolling, knowing this was the footage that could make or break their channel. But even he was beginning to crack. The bravado had vanished, replaced by a raw, primal fear. Priya, once the skeptic, was now a trembling mess, clutching a small religious amulet she always carried. Samir, usually so rational, was muttering about electromagnetic anomalies and dimensional rifts, his voice bordering on hysteria. Nisha remained withdrawn, her eyes haunted. The red mark on her arm seemed to pulse with a faint, malevolent glow. Arjun, the protector, was constantly on edge, his flashlight beam darting nervously into every shadow. He felt a growing sense of dread, a feeling that something truly evil resided within these walls. Around midnight, they huddled together in the main hall, the flickering beam of Rohan's flashlight their only comfort. A chilling gust of wind swept through the room. Then, the whispers started again, closer this time, more distinct. They seemed to be chanting something in a language none of them understood, a guttural, rhythmic drone that sent shivers down their spines. Suddenly, a blood-curdling shriek pierced the darkness, followed by a sickening thud. "Samir!" Priya screamed. Rohan fumbled for his lighter, his hand shaking so violently he could barely ignite the flame. The small flicker revealed Samir lying motionless on the floor, his eyes wide with terror, a trickle of blood seeping from his ear. Panic erupted. Arjun tried to revive Samir, but it was no use. He was gone. The remaining four huddled together, their terror reaching fever pitch. They were trapped in a haunted house with a malevolent entity, and now one of them was dead. Suddenly, a wave of icy cold washed over them. The shadowy figure they had glimpsed earlier materialized in front of them, its form gaunt and spectral, its eyes burning with an unholy light. It reached out a skeletal hand towards Nisha, the red mark on her arm glowing brighter. Nisha screamed, a raw, primal sound of pure terror. The shadowy figure lunged. Just as it seemed all hope was lost, a brilliant, blinding light filled the hall. It emanated from the far end of the room, growing in intensity, pushing back the darkness. The chanting stopped. The shadowy figure recoiled, hissing like a creature of the night exposed to sunlight. A wave of warmth washed over them, replacing the bone-chilling cold. The oppressive atmosphere lifted. The fear that had gripped them began to recede, replaced by a sense of peace. As the light subsided, they saw a figure standing at the end of the hall. It was an old woman, dressed in simple white clothes, her face radiating a gentle serenity. In her hand, she held a small, intricately carved wooden amulet that glowed faintly. The red mark on Nisha's arm faded. The scratches on the wall beside the rocking horse vanished. The broken camera lens repaired itself. Samir stirred, his eyes fluttering open, confusion replacing the terror. The old woman spoke, her voice soft but resonant, filling the hall with a calming energy. This house was once touched by great sorrow and pain, but the darkness has been held here for too long. It is time for peace. She raised the amulet, and a beam of pure white light shot forth, engulfing the room. The walls seemed to shimmer, the air crackled with energy, and the oppressive feeling that had permeated the haveli vanished completely. When the light faded, the old woman was gone. The haveli no longer felt menacing. The air was clean, the shadows no longer seemed to writhe. A sense of tranquility had settled over the house. They rushed to the gates, and this time, they swung open easily. As they stumbled out into the pre-dawn light, they looked back at Pret Bhavan. It still looked old and abandoned, but the aura of malevolence was gone. It seemed ordinary. They never spoke of the true horror they had faced that night. The footage on Rohan's camera was corrupted, showing only static after the initial strange occurrences. No one would have believed them anyway, but they knew what they had experienced. They had stared into the abyss and been pulled back by something they couldn't explain. They had witnessed a miracle. Years later, the tale of the Shadow Chaser's night at Pret Bhavan became a local legend, whispered in hushed tones. Some said the house was still haunted, others claimed it was finally at peace. No one dared to venture inside again. However, a single piece of footage survived. Priya had managed to recover one corrupted file from her camera. It was a short clip, barely a few seconds long, taken just before the blinding light filled the hall. In the background, behind the shadowy figure lunging at Nisha, a faint image could be seen in a dusty mirror hanging on the wall. It was the reflection of the old woman, her eyes filled with compassion, her hand outstretched, holding the glowing amulet. The clip ended abruptly. This short, grainy footage, never uploaded by the Shadow Chasers, remained hidden for years, a silent testament to the terrifying night and the inexplicable miracle that saved them. It was a chilling reminder that sometimes, in the darkest of places, hope can appear in the most unexpected form. Years passed. Rohan, Priya, Nisha, and Arjun tried to move on. The terrifying night at Pret Bhavan, a shared, unspoken trauma that lingered beneath the surface of their lives. The Shadow Chasers disbanded. The desire for internet fame had been extinguished by a fear far more profound than anything they had ever sought to capture on camera. Priya, haunted by nightmares, threw herself into her photography, focusing on landscapes and nature, anything far removed from the decaying walls and oppressive shadows of the haveli. Samir, after a lengthy recovery, became a recluse, his once keen interest in technology replaced by a deep-seated paranoia. Misha, quiet before, became almost spectral, her eyes often fixed on some unseen point in the distance, a constant reminder of the touch of the malevolent entity. Arjun, the protector, carried a constant sense of guilt, feeling he had failed to protect his friends. The grainy footage Priya had salvaged remained locked away on an old hard drive, a relic of a night they desperately wanted to forget. They never spoke of it, fearing ridicule and a reliving of the terror. However, the legend of Pret Bhavan persisted. Online forums dedicated to the paranormal buzzed with theories about the Shadow Chasers' ill-fated expedition. Some claimed it was an elaborate hoax, others whispered of a genuine haunting, and a few even spoke of a miraculous intervention. It was a young, ambitious paranormal investigator named Anya Sharma who stumbled upon the old forum threads. Intrigued by the lack of conclusive evidence and the persistent rumors, she sought out Priya. Initially hesitant, Priya eventually agreed to share her story, the words tumbling out in a rush of long-suppressed fear and confusion. She even gave Anya the old hard drive. Anya, a tech-savvy skeptic with an open mind, meticulously analyzed the corrupted files. Most were beyond recovery, but one short clip, the one Priya had mentioned, was partially salvageable. It was the footage taken in the final moments before the blinding light. Anya spent weeks poring over the grainy images, enhancing the contrast and stabilizing the shaky footage. She showed it to other paranormal investigators, most of whom dismissed it as inconclusive. But Anya felt there was something significant, something deeply unsettling about it. Driven by an intuition she couldn't explain, she contacted Dr. Vikram Rai, a renowned parapsychologist known for his rigorous scientific approach to paranormal phenomena. Dr. Rai was initially skeptical but agreed to examine the footage out of professional curiosity. It was Dr. Rai who noticed the anomaly in the mirror's reflection. Frame by painstaking frame, he analyzed the subtle movements. The old woman in the mirror did not perfectly mimic the actions of the woman in the foreground. While the woman in white held out the glowing amulet, the reflection's hand was indeed clenched into a tight fist, and the eyes, even in the low resolution, Dr. Rai could discern a chilling difference. The reflection's eyes held a glint of something cold, something predatory, a stark contrast to the serene compassion in the eyes of the woman in the foreground. Dr. Rai was disturbed. He showed his findings to Anya, and a cold dread washed over her. What if the miracle they had witnessed wasn't a salvation at all? What if they had been rescued from one entity by another, perhaps one even more sinister? Anya delved deeper into the history of Pret Bhavan, poring over old local records and folklore. She discovered a forgotten tale, a story whispered only in the oldest families, of not just one malevolent spirit but two. One was a vengeful entity, the source of the haunting and the violence. The other was a more ancient, enigmatic being, drawn to places of great suffering, a being that could manipulate perceptions and even mimic benevolence. The local legends described this second entity as a, quote, guardian of sorts, but its methods were often cryptic and its motives inscrutable. Sometimes it intervened, sometimes it simply observed, and sometimes the legends hinted at a far more sinister purpose behind its interventions. Anya and Dr. Rai realized the horrifying implication. Had the Shadow Chasers been saved from the immediate threat of the first entity, only to become unwitting pawns of the second? Was the miracle a calculated act, a way to bind them to the Haveli's dark history in some unforeseen way? Anya managed to track down Rohan, who was now living a quiet life, far from the world of online fame. When she showed him the enhanced footage and explained their terrifying theory, the color drained from his face. The memories of that night, which he had tried so hard to bury, resurfaced with brutal clarity. He recalled a fleeting feeling he had in the moment of the blinding light, a sense of unease amidst the relief, as if something wasn't quite right. He had dismissed it then, overwhelmed by the feeling of being saved. But now, the reflection in the mirror, it planted a seed of icy dread in his heart. Together, Anya, Dr. Rai, and a reluctant Rohan decided they had to return to Pret Bhavan. They needed to understand the true nature of the entity in white and the implications of its intervention. Priya and Arjun refused to go, the trauma of that night still too raw. Misha had disappeared years ago, leaving no trace. This time, they approached the haveli with caution and a scientific understanding of the paranormal. Dr. Rai brought an array of sophisticated equipment designed to detect and analyze different types of energy and psychic imprints. Anya documented everything meticulously. As they entered the haveli, the atmosphere was different. The oppressive malevolence was gone, replaced by a strange stillness, an almost expectant silence. They found the main hall exactly as they had left it years ago. Dr. Rai's equipment registered unusual energy fluctuations in the area where the old woman had appeared. It wasn't the chaotic energy of a haunting, but something more controlled, more intentional. They found a hidden passage behind a loose panel in the library, a passage that led to a deeper, older part of the haveli they hadn't discovered before. The air grew heavy again, but this time with a different kind of presence, ancient and powerful. In a vast underground chamber, they found a stone altar covered in strange symbols. The metallic scent they had noticed before was stronger here, mixed with an earthy, ancient odor. Carvings on the walls depicted two figures, one a gaunt, wrathful being, and the other a more fluid, ethereal form, often shown manipulating shadows and light. As Dr. Rai examined the symbols, he realized they belonged to a forgotten cult that had once inhabited the area. A cult that practiced both dark rituals and strange forms of worship, involving entities they believed could offer protection in exchange for something. Suddenly, the temperature in the chamber plummeted. A soft, ethereal glow emanated from the far end of the room. The figure of the old woman materialized before them, as real as she had been that terrifying night. But this time, there was no sense of peace. Her eyes, now clearly visible, held that same unsettling glint they had seen in the mirror's reflection. Her smile was serene, yet somehow hollow. "You seek understanding," she said, her voice still soft but now carrying an undercurrent of something ancient and knowing. "You wish to know the nature of the balance." Rohan, his voice trembling, asked, "What did you do that night? Were you trying to help us?" The entity tilted her head slightly. "Help? Perhaps. Balance must be maintained. One darkness cannot consume all." Anya stepped forward, her voice firm despite the fear churning within her. The reflection, it showed something different. A clenched fist. Hunger in your eyes. The entity's smile widened, but it didn't reach her eyes. Reflections can be revealing. They show what lies beneath the surface. Just as your fear revealed your vulnerability, Dr. Rai's equipment began to overload, emitting frantic beeps and crackles. The air thrummed with an unseen energy. The entity continued, her voice taking on a subtle, almost seductive quality. The vengeful spirit held a certain power here. Its chaos threatened the balance. I redirected its focus. Offered a different arrangement. Rohan felt a cold dread grip his heart. "What arrangement?" The entity's gaze turned towards him, her eyes seeming to pierce his very soul. "A debt. A connection. You were touched by the darkness, all of you. Now, you are also touched by me. The balance requires reciprocity." Anya understood with chilling clarity. They hadn't been saved unconditionally. They had been spared by a different entity, one that had its own agenda, its own way of maintaining power. The miracle wasn't an act of pure benevolence. It was a transaction. The entity raised her hand, and the symbols on the altar began to glow. Shadows in the chamber deepened and writhed. Rohan felt a strange pull, a subtle urging in the back of his mind. "The haveli is a nexus," the entity explained. "A place where energies converge. You have experienced its power. Now, you are part of its story." Dr. Rai, finally finding his voice, spoke with a mixture of fear and scientific fascination. "What do you want?" The entity's gaze shifted to him, patience seeker. "The balance unfolds in its own time. You have opened a door. Now, you will see what lies beyond." Suddenly, the ground began to tremble. Cracks appeared in the stone walls. The ethereal glow intensified, and the entity began to fade, her form becoming translucent. "The connection is made," her voice echoed, growing fainter. "The balance will be served." Then, she was gone. The trembling stopped, but the air in the chamber remained charged with an unsettling energy. They were left alone, the chilling implications of the entity's words hanging heavy in the silence. They had sought to understand the miracle, but they had uncovered something far more terrifying. They were not free. They were bound to Pret Bhavan in a way they couldn't comprehend, indebted to an entity whose motives remained shrouded in terrifying mystery. The real horror had not ended that night. It had merely begun. The escape from the underground chamber was fraught with a palpable sense of urgency. The haveli seemed to groan around them, the old stones shifting and dust raining down as if disturbed by the entity's manifestation. Rohan felt an insistent tug, a magnetic pull drawing him deeper into the structure, a chilling counterpoint to his desperate desire to flee. Anya and Dr. Rai noticed his increasing disorientation. His eyes glazed over with a distant look. "Rohan, come on. We need to get out of here," Anya urged, pulling his arm. He blinked, as if emerging from a dream. "I feel like I need to go back. There's something." He trailed off, shaking his head, trying to fight the unseen compulsion. Dr. Rai, his face pale, but his scientific mind still working, theorized. The entity mentioned a connection, a debt. "It seems to be exerting some form of influence over you, Rohan." They managed to drag him out of the haveli just as a section of the old wall collapsed behind them. Standing in the pale morning light, Pret Bhavan loomed before them, no longer merely abandoned but imbued with a sense of ancient, watchful malevolence. Days turned into weeks, and Rohan's condition worsened. The pull towards the haveli intensified, manifesting as vivid dreams filled with the ethereal figure and the glowing symbols. He became withdrawn, his thoughts consumed by a sense of obligation he couldn't articulate. Anya and Dr. Rai researched frantically, delving into occult texts and forgotten histories, trying to understand the nature of the entity and the cult that worshipped it. They discovered that the, quote, guardian was not a benevolent protector, but a being that thrived on balance, often achieved through manipulation and subtle forms of enslavement. The cult believed that offering sacrifices and forming connections with the guardian ensured the banishment of more chaotic dark forces. But the price was a gradual loss of self, emerging with the entity's agenda. Anya found a chilling passage in one of the texts. The guardian offers solace from the storm, but in its embrace, the self dissolves, becoming another thread in its intricate tapestry. They realized that the miracle that saved them was not an act of kindness, but a strategic move by the guardian, binding them to the haveli, making them part of its balance. Nisha's disappearance now took on a sinister new meaning. Had she succumbed to the entity's influence? Driven by a desperate need to save Rohan, Anya and Dr. Rai decided their only option was to confront the guardian again. They knew it was incredibly risky, but they couldn't stand by and watch their friend be consumed. This time, they were better prepared. Dr. Rai had developed devices designed to disrupt psychic energies and create a protective field. Anya had gathered artifacts mentioned in the cult's texts, items believed to have some form of resonance against the guardian's influence. As they approached Pret Bhavan, the air felt heavy, expectant. Rohan, though still battling the pull, was more lucid, his fear outweighing the compulsion. He knew, deep down, that returning was a dangerous gamble, but he also knew he couldn't live with the constant, insidious influence. They entered the haveli, the silence more unnerving than the previous cacophony of paranormal activity. The underground chamber felt colder, the symbols on the altar glowing with a faint, malevolent light. The ethereal figure materialized before them, her serene smile sending a shiver down their spines. "You have returned," she said, her voice laced with a hint of amusement. "The threads of balance draw you back." Anya stepped forward, holding one of the ancient artifacts, a silver pendant etched with protective symbols. "We know what you are. You didn't save us. You ensnared us." The guardian's smile didn't waver. Salvation and ensnarement are often two sides of the same coin. The chaotic darkness threatened to unravel this nexus. I offered a different path. Dr. Rai activated his devices, a faint hum filling the chamber. The energy fluctuations around the guardian seemed to waver. "Your balance comes at a cost," Rohan said, his voice stronger than it had been in days. "The cost of our freedom, our very selves." The guardian's eyes, for the first time, flickered with something other than serene detachment. A hint of annoyance, perhaps even anger. The balance is paramount. Individual desires are insignificant in the face of cosmic order. Anya held up the pendant. "This place was corrupted long before we arrived. You didn't restore balance. You merely shifted the scales in your favor." The chamber began to tremble again, more violently this time. The ethereal glow around the guardian intensified, and her form flickered. "You trespass on forces you do not understand. The threads cannot be severed so easily." Suddenly, the ground beneath them cracked open, revealing a dark, swirling abyss. A gust of icy wind erupted from the depths, carrying whispers that clawed at their minds, a chorus of tormented souls. The guardian's serene facade finally shattered. Her eyes blazed with an ancient power, and her voice took on a chillingly resonant quality. "You seek to disrupt the balance? Then you will face the consequences." Shadows writhed and coalesced around them, taking on grotesque forms. The whispers intensified, threatening to overwhelm their sanity. Rohan felt the pull towards the abyss. a siren call promising oblivion. But Anya held the pendant aloft, chanting the ancient words she had found in the texts. Dr. Rye's devices pulsed with energy, creating a shimmering barrier around them. The Guardian lashed out with tendrils of shadow, but the protective field held. The chamber became a battleground between ancient forces and human defiance. Then Rohan, drawing on a strength he didn't know he possessed, fought back against the pull. He focused on the faces of his friends, on the memory of the terror they had shared, and a spark of pure will ignited within him. "We are not threads in your tapestry," he roared, breaking free from the hypnotic influence. His defiance seemed to weaken the Guardian. Her form flickered more violently, and the shadows recoiled. Anya realized that the key was not to fight the Guardian's power directly, but to disrupt the nexus, the source of its influence. The altar, ignoring the swirling abyss and the menacing shadows. She lunged towards the altar, the silver pendant held high. As she touched the ancient stone, a surge of energy coursed through her. The symbols flared, then began to crack. The Guardian shrieked, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage. Her ethereal form began to dissipate, the light around her flickering and dying. The shadows recoiled, and the whispers faded into silence. The ground stopped trembling. The abyss remained, a dark, silent maw, but the oppressive energy in the chamber had lifted. The Guardian was gone. They didn't linger. They fled the haveli, the sense of urgency replaced by a profound exhaustion and a fragile hope. As they looked back, Pret Bhavan stood silent and still, but something had changed. The air around it felt lighter, less burdened. Rohan found his mind clearer, the insistent pull gone. The dreams faded. He began the slow process of healing. They never returned to Pret Bhavan. The legend faded over time, the house becoming just another dilapidated ruin. But Anya kept the silver pendant, a tangible reminder of the ancient forces they had confronted, and the price of a, quote, miracle. Years later, Anya received a cryptic message, an anonymous email containing a single, heavily distorted image. It was a reflection in a dusty mirror, barely discernible, but it seemed to show two figures. One was vaguely human, the other ethereal, its hand clenched in a fist, its eyes burning with a cold, predatory hunger. The attached message was a single word: balance. The chilling implication was clear. The Guardian might have been weakened, but it wasn't gone. The balance it craved still existed, and perhaps, in some unseen way, their debt was not yet fully paid. The miracle had a long tail, and the true horror might still be lurking just beyond their perception, waiting for the scales to tip once more.